exposing the hate and exploring the love. This is the Truth Frequency Radio Network.
Hola, this is Sienna, inviting you to join me tonight as we navigate through the seen and the unseen, explore external and internal realities, expose on-world and off-world agendas, discover a path to joy and freedom. Now, join me as we illuminate the Shadowland and reclaim our birthright as free and sovereign beings. Good evening, everyone. This is Sienna, and you are at Illuminating the Shadowland. Tonight, we're diving into part 2 with Bood Hickson of Beyond Community in Queensland, Australia. They have an incredible, beautiful 200-acre property on the hills behind Cairns and the Coral Sea in the tropical North Queensland area. And this gentleman has had many years of experience in community building. And so we are going to dive deeper into the topic tonight. Good evening, Bood.
Good evening, Sienna.
It's wonderful to have you on the show.
It's actually morning. It's actually morning over here, and we're lucky enough to have a beautiful sunny day because we live in the wet tropics. So by definition, we have rainforest, so we get a lot of rain. So it's a beautiful day here.
Oh, how beautiful. It's wonderful to hear that. Well, I am so excited to hear more of the details of the inner workings of your experience in community, because I am a great proponent of community as a solution out of the alienation, incredible separation and loneliness of all of our hearts as we are awakening to potential for a new paradigm. We're still all holding each other at arm's length in a very busy world that is robbing us of intimacy and connection with nature and with each other. And so I'm very interested to hear, and I know it's an extremely challenging thing because we are so shut down in these channels of relationship. So we were going to start. Where were we going to start now? My mind is just flown out the window. I'm so excited to hear some of these facilitation. We were going to get down and dirty with some conflict resolution. And what do you call it? You have this great name for it.
Well,
the dirty pie, or
grumble pie.
Grumble pie. Okay, but take this wherever you like.
Sure. Okay, just to go back one step, we use the term community, and I guess what I've got to say in this case, we're really talking about what we call intentional communities, because there's a lot of confusion out there. You know, we use the word community, and it's sort of a nice fuzzy word that everyone has a slightly different headspace about it. You know, it's curious that, you know, community comes from the same roots as communism, and yet, you know, all of a sudden all the red flags jump out there if you slightly change the same word which has the same roots. So what we're really talking about is intentional communities, and what they are, as opposed to your normal community, which is a town or a village or an area, is where the group involved are really are directing where that community goes, as opposed to just participating, you know, by virtue of their location. So in this exercise, our intentional community was really trying to work out, you know, how we can build those richer, more meaningful lives in this period of great transformation, uncertainty, and a lot of pain. So within our community, dealing with conflict became really the paramount issue in terms of holding the ship together, or the raft in this case. Once those lashings start coming undone, you know, it looks like us as Thor Heyerdahl, you know, trying to cross the Pacific, you know. Hello, it's a long way from home. So, we really got to be mindful of our lashings and the processes we use to deal with conflict, because, community can be going beautifully, and one day, a few people get out the wrong side of bed and wham bam, thank you, ma'am, it's all over. We say things we probably shouldn't have said, or whatever. It can be so fragile,
Yeah,
because we don't, as you would say, we are still trying to work out our own shadowlands inside, and stuff comes up,
yeah,
and we've got to be ready for that. And part of this discussion about we had last week about understanding that we all have baggage, and that one of our responsibilities by definition is to learn to be a conduit for other people's stuff, and learn to be receptive of your own stuff, and to be listening. So what we then tried to do within that, our greater understanding of this landscape, this human landscape within community, I spent, particularly as the driver, I guess, of the governance component, a lot of time thinking about processes that would help us to deal with this, because we don't have the answers. We can only keep learning by trial and, sadly, sometimes failure.
right. Yeah, it's a
But
research.
yeah, it's a work in progress, and uh, that's okay. We really all need to take that approach, and it's not the final thing. And the more mistakes we make, hopefully, ultimately, the further this raft will float. So Grumble
Yeah.
Pie was an interesting one, and it was usually, you know, a few days after the governance meeting, so that it was far enough away from the next one, and it was great. It was held in the right spirit, Grumble Pie. And basically what it was an invitation to deal with stuff before it got out of hand. And with one of the community members, a lady, and we're still good friends, of huge respect for this person. But it seemed that whenever we got involved with projects, it became a huge arm wrestle, And uh, by going through a number of these grumble pies, there was certainly no problem with us wanting to work on it. That wasn't the issue. Our challenge in this case was understanding what the hell was going on, And it happens that I'm also an astrologer, Sienna. So, when things became problematic with a relationship, I have the benefit of being able to consult the heavens, and that obviously gives us some insights to where the problems might be coming from. And in this case, it was clearly that we're both very passionate. When we got involved, there was a subtle ego game going on here between us, about who was driving, and you would sort of, I would think we'd got to some point, and then I'd find that no, it was my friend was already decided it was going in a different direction. There was a wiring problem, and in the end, we resolved it quite simply by me and her not actually building these projects together, because it wasn't that we couldn't work in the same project, but we really needed to define what we were working on. So it wasn't we weren't in the same triage, and that worked remarkably well. So sometimes understanding the layer that the conflict is at is really important, and in this case, it was a personality issue, and you're going to have those. And we found a really workable solution in the end. Maybe we could find out ultimately we could work more directly on projects, but we needed to understand the dynamics in that relationship to get ourselves out of conflict with each other.
And so
um,
you weren't blaming each other or just kept going at it, but you sort of backed up and tried to get a larger insight and didn't make anyone wrong. And this is what I'm hearing you say. You hit a place of neutrality and non-judgment, and even though you couldn't really come into harmony and cooperation, you didn't villainize each other any further.
Yeah, we realised what was happening. Our natures were both to initiate. We're both cardinal signs, and so we could clearly see after we talked this through, that we were misunderstanding each other a lot of the time, and this was partly just due to our natural dynamics, of wanting to initiate when, we would have been better off to get, you know, plugs that work together that are that are more compatible. We still worked in the same projects, and I will explain some of those later on, where the conflict between us actually helped define the size and the scale of the project in quite a nice way in the end. But before we get there, I thought I'd talk about a more serious conflict that we found that we couldn't resolve. And this came up with one of the community members, and there were plenty of stuff. We all made mistakes. We were all fallible. So what I don't want to do here is try and suggest that one person was not making it happen, but in this case, that person actually chose to leave because it was pretty clear that the conflict that had gone past the stage that it could be repaired. Now, we don't know whether it was a case that the novelty had run out anyhow. That there was more than just the conflict. The conflict may have just been the final thing that made it very easy for this person to exit. And sadly, in this case, that friendship is not functional at the moment. Not to say that it might not be. I don't think anyone's sort of sitting with great grievances, but it wasn't reconciled within the community. And there was conflict. And it got to a point in our meetings that we changed our modus operandi because there was serious conflict going on. And it related around uh, a woman and so-called boyfriend girlfriend versus other community members, and it was totally innocent, really, when you stop and look at it. But it didn't matter. The conflict was very real, and in the end, it caused a lot of pain, and it wasn't reconciled. But this exercise showed to us that yes, there were cases that we had to have rules. It became apparent at the meeting that this anger between two members was so out there. No one could miss the elephant in the room, that it was just destroying
This
our
was
meetings.
around a sexual issue, a sharing of a one woman. Was that it?
It wasn't really sexual. It was jealousy. I mean, it was a very trivial thing. I won't go into it because it doesn't need. But it was purely about a perceived jealousy. You'd have to come back. It wasn't,
And
so
so
it
this
related.
person just never wanted to own the jealousy, and so it couldn't get resolved. Is that what you're saying?
Uh, that's certainly part of it. Whether it's the whole story or not, I guess we didn't get enough closure on. But what was interesting was at the meetings we acknowledged that there was a problem and that we had to do something about. So what we did was that we changed our meetings uh, through discussion. That if we got to a point where it was clear that we were getting emotional, that we would just do a timeout. We just, anyone could just go, do the hand signal of a T, and basically it meant move on to the next topic. Okay. uh, because we just realized that we weren't, our meetings weren't going anywhere, because we just end up in this emotional spot where it was clear that the spirit of cooperation wasn't functioning the way it needed to. um, but out of this conflict, we delved deeper. We gave plenty of respect to all the parties to give them plenty of time to think about it and come back and hopefully try and resolve it, firstly, between themselves. But clearly that wasn't happening. So then we got involved as the broader community, and we got people to talk about it, and we actually made some rules, believe it or not. And the first rule was that violence was unacceptable. But under digging into it, it was literally like, we were doing forensic as a group. We decided that it actually wasn't violence, it was abuse. So we then decided that neither violence or abuse were acceptable within our community, and that violence was distinguished by being by being physical abuse as opposed to verbal abuse. And this was very constructive. So we could see the reason why that we may need rules. Now, these rules are explicit over the fence, so it's not to suggest that, you know, we didn't believe in those rules before, but we felt at this time it was important for us to make it explicit what we meant by it, so everyone was clear. And everyone agreed to that, which was encouraging. But the underlying jealousy issues, or I would say probably on reflection more mother issues for this person, didn't get resolved, and it caused people to depart. But sometimes it can't be, resolved, and whether it was that issue alone or whether that was just the camel that broke the straw
Now,
that
did
broke
you
the
have
camel's back, we don't
places
know.
where people could go and work out their things one-on-one with a counselor or somebody who would help them with that? And do you have that as part of your community, that people are doing inner work on their egos and on their wounds? And because I would consider that, quite frankly, a prerequisite in any community that I fostered or was involved in. They would have to do their shadow work. They would have to be consciously working on the transmutation of ego and the healing of their pain body before I would even want to enter the community.
Uh,
But certainly there would have to be all kinds of avenues for that to occur, because I can't even imagine how we could transition into the kind of heavenly spaces we want to be with each other.
yeah. Now, it's a great point you make, but beggars can't always be choosers. So we don't sit there and say, to people when they write to us inquiring about our community, how much work have you done on yourself? And, are you going to agree to, deal with your shadow? They might never even heard of that term. But, in a very classic Australian way, in the fact that this group had come together, they were fairly, progressive kind of people. We were doing, we're all by definition, when you get together, you see each other's stuff. We were all doing work on ourselves, but we certainly hadn't formalized it in any way, shape, or form. And what we did through this government process is when we agreed, okay, we're going to have time out on these key issues, what we then agreed is that there would be three members of the community, and this may be the right model or may not, but that we agreed that there would be three members, one being a male, one being a female, and a third party. In this case, that was me as the community host, agreed to by all. Um, that would then do the work behind the scenes, on this particular issue to try and, deal with it outside the hour meeting, which, we were trying to get stuff done. Now, between this group of three, let's say that the they would sort of say, okay, well, we think, in this case, so and so should talk to so and so and, work that through and get back to us. So we would have another process to try and facilitate, which I guess, but it was totally within the community. At no stage have we gone to outside parties to try and resolve it. So I guess the answer to your question is that no, we don't have the means and resources or scale to formalize these processes, but we were fortunate to be aware of them. Uh, and I think it's a really good thing is for to have these conversations early in communities so people understand the layers of complexity to working harmoniously together. Um, Now, what I'd like to do, Sienna, if it makes sense, is just to talk about how, with all of that stuff I've talked about, we work with all of these people to do some wonderful things as community that we couldn't have done if we weren't a community. And
Yes, I would love to
probably,
have our listeners hear that.
yeah, probably the highlight of that period, we had a lot of great times together. So even though those people are not here anymore, that five or six community members, they've moved on, some for their own reasons, others for different. There was a lot of joy, and I don't think anyone's feeling, oh shit, I wish I'd never gone there. But we had some great things and some things that we did together. And the one that really comes to mind was uh, was actually feeding the Aboriginal dancers at the Laura Dance Festival. Now, the Laura Dance Festival is the oldest dance festival, Aboriginal dance festival in Australia, and it's very, very significant cultural um, meeting. It's held on Cape York Peninsula, which is the pointy bit at the top of Australia on the right, which is dominated by Aboriginal people. It's one of the last great wildernesses, and we have the oldest living culture living on it. So it's an amazing place. And
Mm.
this Lara Dance Festival is where those communities come together on their own Bora ground, their own sacred place, and dance, in a place they've been dancing for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And it's an amazing thing because the non-Indigenous Australians come along, and it's about a 50-50 numbers. So it's a really peculiar social dynamic. It's alcohol and drug free, so there aren't those distractions. And most people that go along to this remember it as one of the most amazing events I've ever seen. For those who haven't seen Aboriginal dancing, it's very unique. Um, they call it shaky leg. They dance with their legs, sort of, they glide across the ground, shaking them. Because as we know, everyone in the world has a dance, and it's one of the great things that unite the global family. We all have dances, and yet everywhere in the world they're slightly different. Um, so we had the great fortune. We were asked whether we would like to cater for the dancers. So we had to feed about 600 people, and through our networks, because we'd already been involved as a community in local food networks, bringing organic food locally in competition to the big supermarkets here.
Mm.
So we organised the organic food and we put the whole thing together. But within our community, looking at this opportunity, there was conflict. And with the girl I was telling you about before, because she wanted to do everything. She not only wanted to get the food and get it up there and, help them, but to cook and coordinate the volunteers and the whole lot. And so she was the expansive person, and I was the black hat person. I'm saying, hey, we've never done this before. You know, there's nothing there. Because I'd been to the location. We can't just go and find the gas cylinders if it's not happening and so forth. So there was between the two of us who had had conflict. We actually sort of framed the debate in terms of where we got to and what we actually delivered. Can you hear me, Sienna?
On. Yes,
Okay,
you're breaking up a little bit, and so I was muting my mic, but we're fine. Yeah, if you can be a little closer to your mic, it might be helpful because we're getting a little bit of distortion.
okay, yeah, no problems. I'll just look more at the machine here. Okay, so just taking us back. I don't know where it dropped out or where it got difficult, but I'll go back to the point was that as we framed this project as a community, uh, the female member, she was the expansionist. She wanted to do it all. And I tended to play the black hat in terms of saying the critical thinking about what we really could do and what we couldn't. And between us, it was wonderful because here was where this conflict was actually being constructively used to help define how much we did. And as I said before, there was never any question about the integrity of each other. It was just, what we could realistically deliver and different views on the challenges to that. Um, in the end, we pretty much did it all. With a bit of help, went up there to this remote location, set up the kitchens, got the food there, uh, helped coordinate it with the chefs, and it was wonderful. We got to feed them, and everyone was appreciative, and we felt great about it. It was just one of these wonderful things that we'd had the opportunity to do it, and everyone said afterwards, it's never worked out. This is the first time it's actually worked that all these people got fed. So it was a really wonderful experience and the highlight of that, and it showed that by working on the conflicts and understanding the different personalities, that yes, you can operate at this other level, with your raft, and go places that, your one stick's not going to go.
Well, that's a beautiful example of being willing to drop the false mask and see what's there. And sometimes what's there does seem impossible. But this is one of the things about making the decision that you're going to be part of another level of human experiment in coming together in teams and communities. And what does cooperation feel like? And what does having to support? And what is doing something wonderful with things that are more heart-based, that are really feeling on purpose with our, what people call their life's purpose, and to love and appreciate life and respect nature, and that you do these things together and it enriches your life so incredibly. It doesn't mean it's without conflict, but at least you were real about it, and nobody was trying to just gloss over the situation, and the commitment to getting something done was stronger, it sounds like, than whatever level of personality conflict you had going on there.
And it highlights this whole point that ultimately, to have a sustainable community, a community that is strong enough when things do get tough, because the reality is that in Australia, things are pretty good. But if we can't resolve conflict when things are good, we're going to be challenged when things get tougher.
Yeah, well, we're all going to have to learn to do this because they're turning up the heat. We'll be back. We're taking a short break. This is Sienna Leah. You're at Illuminating the Shadowlands. Stay with us. Welcome back, everyone. This is Sienna Leah, and you're at Illuminating the Shadowland. I'm here tonight with Bood Hickson of the Beyond community outside of Queensland, Australia. Well, this is our final segment. Can you believe how fast this goes? And I am curious what wisdom you would like to share with us in terms of this final section.
Okay, well, I guess what I'd like to do, and I hope the audience will bear with us, but is to paint the sort of larger picture, to give more context. And the reason for that is that it seems to me that in the digital age, we are bombarded with content. And what we struggle with is the context to understand this bombardment of information and knowledge and insights and wisdoms, to get some perspective of where we are, because this is the great challenge. People can see that things in the world are not good and they're getting out of hand, but they've got no sense of where this is going. And so I was keen to share with you my sort of own understanding of where we are, and why I think it's so important that we explore community at the moment.
Good.
And I shared with you the other day the story of my first trip to India in 1988, at a fairly tender age, and just amazed by India. I mean, it's such an experience. The person that arrives in India is not the same person that leaves, even if they leave within the first 3 days. But like so many of my trips overseas, it was very profound, and as is often the case, the really most pertinent messages came on the last day, and that was true in India again. And that was that on the last day of India, after being there for 3 months and almost returning home in a box with hepatitis and glandular fever and all the good kinds of things you can share in India. Um, I learned on the last day from a fellow who was a Raj Yogi, and I'd been really perplexed at looking at India because he was the richest of so many countries in the world, so rich not only in landscape, in wisdom, in knowledge, in temples, um, but yet the perception, for me as a Westerner and the global perception was that India was a mess. It was unsavable, or we had to save it somehow, but no one really knew how to fix it. There was this sort of whole notion about saving India, and yet I got the impression that India wasn't quite so taken with this notion of saving India. And on the last day, I think that was crystallized by an encounter with a member of the Raj Yogis who basically, told me that we were actually at a really critical point. This was 1988, and he told me that the world had actually ended the year before in 1987, which, as you can imagine, I was talking to him, I was a little bit taken back by this statement. Um,
Uh-huh.
but on explanation, it was fascinating that what he was saying was that the Kali Yuga, the age of Kali, actually ended in 1987, and the yugas are the ages in India. And under the Vedic knowledge, we're led to believe there are four great yugas: the golden age, the silver age, the copper, and the iron age. The iron age being the age of Kali, and that in 1987 this ended. And I thought, wow, well, this is interesting. And it certainly helped to explain to me why, the West was trying to save India, but India seemed to be thinking, well, it was premature. It wasn't until the whole thing had broken down that the phoenix could rise. Now, the great wisdom for me was that what the Raj Yogis told me is that we'd actually moved on, that the age of Kali ended in 1987, and that we were now in a new age called the Diamond Age. I can't remember the Vedic name, but that this was a little age, in the greater cycle, okay, that didn't get talked about in most of the readings I'd looked at. And that this period lasts for 38 years. Now, remember that started in 1988, and I believe this truth from my experience to date. Doesn't mean that other people have to, um, but that would mean that it goes till 2025, and that 2006 was basically halfway through this period. Now, the Raj Yogis described this to me. They said, yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem to make sense to most people, because we are very much in a linear view of time. But what I understood, that this was like the Ouroboros, the serpent biting its tail, which is common to the old cultures all around the planet, this motive of the circle, the cycle of life going on. And that what the Raj Yogis were saying was that we are in the overlap period when the serpent bites its tail, that the old world is actually ending. It's still here. We can see it, but it is actually in decline. And that the new world, which most of us are struggling to see, but we are sensing it, is actually in the rise. And that this started in 1988. And the reason I tell you this is because it really helped give me context to where we are in this overwhelming age with so much information, so many agendas, so much interesting stuff to get our heads around. And as a result, it's taught me to operate in a very different way. So now, to help me through the confusion, I tend to see myself as living in three different worlds. Um, the first world, which I'm sure most of your audience know about, is the so-called real world, that we're told by our education systems that, we need a job and we've got to pay mortgages and that this is as good as it gets. So I live in that world, but the good news is that I spend less time in that world every day. And I have another world, which is, for me, is the new world. And as part of our community, we've got the great fortune to shape this new world. It's the great joy of playing, of being brave, is that we are pioneers. It's really up to us to create new vessels to float on this new ocean. And who knows? A lot of them might not make it to the next world, in 2026. But it doesn't really matter, because in essence, what the Raj Yogis were saying was that think of it like a big tree. That there's this big tree, and the tree represents this great cycle of ages. That in the early days, like a young plant, this tree just goes for the light, for the spirit, the truth. It just responds to that heat and warmth of Father Sun and just goes straight up. It knows what it's about. It doesn't have any deviations. And that goes on through the golden age and the silver age. And then we slowly start to tarnish more. So we can see where the notion of the cross comes from. The trunk of the tree being the vertical axis, okay? And then the cross, the horizontal axis being the earth. And as we become more tarnished and of the earth, that's when we start to see these branches come out from the trunk or the truth. And that gives context. So the great branches are like the great religions. They come from the same spirit place, the same context, but they describe the truth to people that are not so clear about it in different circumstances. And what the Raj Yogi is saying is that this tree has reached its zenith. It has many branches. A lot of these branches don't even seem to realize they come from the same trunk. It's in a state of maximum multiplicity. So there's fully laden with seeds, and the seeds represent humanity. And that we are all these great potentials. We each have the potential to be another tree, to create another world. And that what the Raj Yogis were saying was that the tree is actually dead. But all of the seed on the tree is there with all of the potential to create new worlds. And this very much flavors my view of where we are. And it's a story of great hope, because it's very hard for most people who are looking at the old world to see the hope. And even though the new world is hard to see at first, it's there, and it's exciting for me that clearly the more the old world falls down, the more we're starting to see the new world replace it. And, to use the great Hindu approach, that is the role of Lord Shiva, is to cut down the old world and make new for the resurgence, just like the rainforest here. When the old tree falls down, those young seedlings get a chance to go for the light and to create a new reality. The third world that I'll just briefly mention is that I believe that in this period of 38 years that there are many, many miracles. There are much magic that can be exercised, because we are in a period of very high consciousness, even though we are in a very dross and decayed world. So my third world, I tend to spend now visiting previous lifetimes. In essence, it seems to me that there's a period now to do a lot of spiritual work on ourselves, to go back and literally like an archaeological dig, and to deal with many of past karmic actions that obviously related to our shadows. And that by doing this, we can, hopefully redeem and put to bed some of the things that we've been involved in that has helped create this world whose time is up. Because we've all been involved. We all have part of the dross by definition, because we're here working on our stuff. But the story I have in this is that it is a period of immense hope, that even though not everyone is going to see that new world in their current incarnated bodies, we are all part of that new world just as much as we are part of the old world. And understanding this transition gives real meaning and purpose to life, and us being pioneers in developing the real tools that I think we need to go forward. So in understanding who we are and that we are each here for a reason, we've in fact chosen to be here at this time. We can learn by embracing our shadow what it is that we've actually come to do and play our little part in creating this new and most beautiful tree.
Oh, that's lovely. And in the remaining, well, I guess we have about 15 minutes or so. Where can people begin who are newbies to all of this? Where do you start if you want to create something new that's community based? How do you gather? How do you facilitate? How do you move? Do you have any advice on that for? I know you've been so far down this rabbit hole, it might be hard to fathom people just sort of contemplating the possibility.
Yeah. Well, if we're talking about community, I mean, there's so many domains within what I've just said. You know, it's a metaphor for life. But in terms of community, the Intentional Communities Directory, particularly for people living in the States or North America or even Southern America or the world, there are lots of communities all around the world, and it's often a case of looking for a community that sort of reflects with where you're up to. There's thousands of them. So there's certainly plenty of opportunity to explore community. In terms of, I guess, my path and this whole issue of governance, I'd like to refer to the celebrated author Jared Diamond, who I'm sure a number of your listeners have probably heard to. I've been a bit fascinated by his work because it's a real insight to the Western mind and the crisis that it's now in and possibly where to go. His latest book is called The World Until Yesterday. And to me, this is really fascinating. I've been aware of his work. I mean, he started talking about, you know, why the Western civilization had been dominant. And, you know, through his good academic approach, you know, could document this very clearly. But obviously something was eating away at him because, you know, he obviously looked further into it. And then he wrote this book called Collapse, which basically, you know, he recognized that the Western civilization, as so-called advanced as it was going nowhere very fast. And this third book, The World Until Yesterday, is really about him now going back and looking beyond the Western world because he realizes the key elements that we've lost in the West that need to be found again actually exist in these indigenous cultures all over the world. And this pulls me back to this whole notion of governance. That it seems to me that we need to take our autonomy, our sovereignty back. We need to have our rights and responsibilities and understand them. And that by governance, we know how to make decisions, not only as an individual when I go to the supermarket and decide, you know, how much I can afford and what to put in my shopping trolley, but how we make decisions collectively and how we make decisions that recognize the conflict in a landscape, not only between different personalities and egos and conditioning and shadows, but across cultures and across times that are totally uncertain. Um, and I guess that's sort of my view is that these worlds that I'm trying to bridge, you know, I realize it's about faith in the middle and process that we can't take the old world into the new world. That's the beauty about a new tree being started again, that we don't have to take the dross. Um, but if we can get greater context at the moment in terms of where we are now, whether that means to people they should get involved in community, whether it means that they should get involved in healing or growing food or nurturing children, there are many ways. Each of us have our own path on that way, but we're awakening ourselves to the transformation that is going on and the fact that it is actually very exciting, as scary and as bewildering as it appears.
Yes, yes, very well said. Thank you for that. It's true, it can be very scary, and when you haven't thought about these things. Now, is there any place where people can go? How would they come to spend time in your community if they were interested?
Yeah, it's a funny one because when we first put intentional community out there, and there's this great site in the States called ic.org, I think it is. It's a very simple one. And I put the stuff up there, and then anyhow, I started getting phone calls from all around the world. And a lovely Italian man said, "Oh, we're really keen," and he brought his kids out here, and they had a holiday here, and it was lovely. It was fantastic. Except I went, "Holy molars!" I didn't actually set this up to encourage people to fly all around the planet. Because that's one of my concerns is that we've obviously in the West we've got a terrible appreciation of our use of energy. Um, so the first step, I guess, is to try and make contact. So it was wonderful that people come here because I think ultimately to be part of a community, you have to visit it. But I do think that maybe we first of all we need, if particularly if we're overseas, is to Skype. We've got lots of technologies where people can get a feel for where they're going and have these conversations. Just as if we want to accept a lift with someone, going somewhere, we need to do a little bit of due diligence to make sure that, yeah, it's a fit that then can justify further expenditure of energy and time and, of course, an airfare if required. Um, but, there's a lot of people looking, the challenge is to actually get into the doing mode, because in the West, we are so good at saying, oh, yeah, yeah, I know all about that because we've read about it or we've discussed it with someone. But the real challenge is getting into the doing. And we can take our time before we get there in the discussion and the thinking about it. But ultimately, the big challenge with community is that you've actually got to make that first step. We can intellectualize it all we like, but that won't help us to actually prepare for the lessons of actually doing it, which are much realer. Uh, Very joyous, but they can be challenging as well. Are you still there, Sienna?
Yes. Yes, I'm muting the mic because we're getting a bit of interference, and this makes the signal stronger. And it's a bit of a delay, but that's all that is. Yes, and then also we're going to be launching sometime in the first quarter of this year. George Cavassalas, Eve Lorgan, Kelly Lachey, Perry Mills, Tom Montauk, Peter Schwartz, and myself, Rise Multiversity. And this is going to be a community building site with all kinds of learning, interactive places to develop communication, facilitation, working on your shadows, developing inner empathy, all the pieces that are necessary to make one of these, to have at least a good shot at making this new paradigm a reality to start in cyberspace so we can gather in a global village and learn and then hopefully have wonderful people such as yourself and others who are boots on the ground making this real, going through the ups and downs and the experimentation, the successes and failures, to share not as our gurus but as resources for us to dialogue and to engage and interact. They're going because I really am called to creating space for community building, and sometimes people are so stuck into the financial crunch that they don't even know how to have an exit strategy to come visit or move onto the land or do these kinds of things, even though the woofing movement is very interesting, isn't it? And I think a lot of people who feel very trapped in the matrix don't realize that there are all kinds of volunteer opportunities to go live in organic farms and communities and indigenous places around the world that, other than the airfare, cost very, very little because you're mainly in a work trade situation. And I have a number of friends. I live here in Ecuador, and there are all kinds of woofers. It's become a nomadic community of people that are wanting to exit a reality that is so toxic to their soul and live a freer life. And they don't have hardly any money. I guess mainly they're younger and healthier, but they've got their backpacks and they're carrying their home on their back. And I know here there's a community that takes these people, and they're all over the place. And the young people are having an incredible adventure just hitting the road and being pioneers. And they are holding a very, very beautiful dedication and pure connection to the earth and honoring of the sacred that is within them, and where they are traveling with a very, what do they call it, very soft footprint. And it's incredible. So there are ways. If Arise, multiversity.org, our site isn't live yet, but it will be soon, so check back with me on that. And if you're really feeling called to make an exit strategy and you want to have an experience of these kinds of places, there are woofing sites, right? Are you on the woofing site? Like, intentional communities can be on these sites, so people can go and find all kinds of volunteer opportunities to live and work and experience and grow and experience a completely different reality.
Yes, we've been Wolf hosts here for about 12 years. Incidentally, the woofing movement started in Australia through the organics movement here, and it's so exciting to see that it's spreading around the world. There is also another one called HelpX out of the
What's
UK.
that called? That broke up. Could you say that again?
Help, HELPX.net, I think it is. It's out of the United Kingdom. So there are more than one of these models, and they are a wonderful way. And we've used them as a means of getting into community by having literally close to 1,000 woofers over the last decade through our home. In many ways, this prepared us for community, being so used to sharing space with people. Because as Anglo-Saxon Australians, who grew up in the bush, we're very independent, frontiers kind of people, self-reliant. And you have to learn about living with people, particularly, from different places, different experiences. So the woofing's been a wonderful introduction.
Again,
So
and woofer sites. We have about a minute left here. So give us your contact information or how they should find you in your community. What is the best way?
The best way is probably first to email me. My email address is bood, BOOD, at tpg.com.au. You can find the Beyond community on the Intentional Communities directory. I think that's at ic.org. The woofing,
Beautiful.
look up WWOOF or HelpX, HELPX. If you Google those,
Beautiful.
you'll find those.
Thank you so much. We're out of time tonight. It goes so fast. All right, adventures of souls that are, think about it. You could hit the road, have a whole different lifestyle. There are all kinds of experiences waiting. You just need to have the bravery sometimes and jump off the cliff. Good night.